Mr. Saurabh Kirpal is a lawyer and an LGBTQ activist based in Delhi and has made significant contributions to the LGBTQ movement by actively standing up against Section 377 and challenging the notions against the community that prevail in our society. He was the editor of the distinguished book Sex and the Supreme Court and has been at the forefront of spreading the message of diversity and inclusion in the gender narrative of India. We welcome you, sir, and thank you so very much to agreeing to be a part of this interview. Um, I'll just start with the first question. The landmark judgment given by the Supreme Court around 2 years ago and decriminalizing Section 377, how do you see the transition that has happened in the past 2 years? Do you think it has made a significant change in the life of the LGBTQ person in India?
I believe it has. You see, a single judgment is not sufficient to change the mindset of a society. So it's not as though this is some kind of a panacea or a magic wand by which suddenly the lives of every queer person in India suddenly becomes perfect or equal to every other citizen. But it's made a very significant dent in the discrimination that has been historically faced by the LGBT community. And it's made a dent in two separate ways. One is, of course, the legal aspect of it. So your act of love is no longer a criminal offense. And therefore, the fear that used to exist of prosecution by the police, forms of harassment by the police, that has disappeared. And that has empowered a lot of people to come out and admit to their sexuality. And people have done so as a consequence of this judgment. People feel braver and emboldened that the sanction of the criminal law is no longer there, forcing them to stay within the closet. But I think a more important development that has happened is not merely the legal impact of the judgment on the queer community, but I think the powerful statement of the law as enunciated by the Supreme Court with the moral authority of the Supreme Court, I think has made an impact on the psyche of the nation at large, really. To me, the most telling thing when the judgment came on the 6th of September 2018 was the remarkable silence of civil society about it and the quiet, tacit acceptance by the entire community as to the decriminalization of Section 377. People accepted it. It was a norm, it was fine because the Supreme Court had said so. It was all right. So I think that was a beginning of the path for the LGBT community to start feeling like equal citizens of the country. And correspondingly, it was a path for society at large to start accepting the LGBTQ community as members of society, not pushing people into the closet, not forcing them to stay in the closet, talking about the issue. That's a very important thing that has happened really also after the judgment, Kunal, is that people, I think this is lit a little spark in the community, which is turning into the flames of freedom, hopefully. So people are now talking about the issues concerning the LGBT community. People are not hiding shy. I remember 10, 15, 20 years ago, much before you were born, that the only time a conversation about the queer community that used to happen used to be first preceded by sniggers or giggles or awkward silences. It was a complete question of putting even the discussion in the closet. Forget the people who were in the closet themselves. Even the discussion of the issue was kept in the closet. And that's the judgment, I think, the impact that has made, is that people are talking openly about the issues. There is no guilt about talking about homosexuality. There's no shyness. There's no taboo anymore about talking about the issues, at least. And that's a start.
Okay. So, as you mentioned, the judgment of 377 in 2018 changed many people's lives. How did it make a difference in your life as a person? Would that be something you'd be comfortable talking about?
Certainly. Well, look, personally, I want, as I said, the former part, I gave you two effects that the judgment had. One is the legal aspect, and the second is the sociological stroke, constitutional stroke, citizenship aspect. As regards the former, No, that made little impact on me because I was a person clothed with privilege and hence did not exactly fear the wrath of criminal law, right? So it was highly unlikely that I was ever going to be prosecuted under Section 377. So, and I was a person who was out to the community, to my friends, my family. I live at home with my parents and my partner. It's a nice joint Hindu family. Well, not my partner, not Hindu, joint family. So that made no practical impact on me as regards illegality is concerned. But certainly, yes, the judgment of 2013 in the Kaushal case, which set aside the Delhi High Court judgment, had made me feel that I could no longer fully rely on the Supreme Court of India, and that had dented my faith in the institution somewhat. And it had made me feel as though my country did not fully appreciate me. And I felt, therefore, that the judgment of 2018 did redeem the constitutional promise of equality and liberty to me as a person. So my faith in the Constitution, my faith in the process of law, and my faith in the Supreme Court of India as the prime guardian of the fundamental rights which have been given to us by the constituent assembly makers, by people like Ambedkar, Nehru, great men and women who gave us those fundamental rights, that they had a tryst with destiny in 1950, and we had our tryst with freedom in 2018.
That's a very interesting way to put it, and that's so very true. Um, we all are aware that the battle does not stop at just decriminalization. Comparing India to other countries like Canada, Spain, Netherlands, United Kingdom, where LGBTQ people have marriage rights, property rights, anti-discrimination laws, and even the government-funded pride events. Do you think we are miles away from all these aspects, or do you believe that the non-inclusive legal structure of India will change very soon?
Well, the two are not necessarily mutually exclusive. I think the answer to both questions is yes. Are we miles away? Yes. Will it change very soon? Not only do I hope so, I feel so. So, in terms of are we miles away? Well, clearly we don't have any anti-discrimination law. And forget the fact that we have no anti-discrimination law against the LGBT community which faces the discrimination. We don't have a general or a generic anti-discrimination law even for women in our country or for a vast majority of minorities or oppressed people. So I don't think that is a terribly great priority for the country, for the politicians, etc. But the fact is, we don't have that anti-discrimination law, and therefore we are miles away from full freedom and equality. And similarly, with the gay marriage issue, it's not important to certain activists, I know, but a large number of the queer community and the people I speak to, at least, would like to have that option on the table and see gay marriage. And I know I'm sure you'll come back to it, so I'm not going to address too much on that front. I'll wait for your questions later. But so we are quite a way away from equality. But the historical perspective of other countries, if that is to be looked at, will show one thing, that change when it happens is very rapid. Partly because society and the societal composition is changing as well. I think the youth of today are not as bigoted as us older people and the people of my generation and above. Yes, they may be in power today, the older people, they hold the instruments of power in their hand, and therefore they exercise an oversized role on the consciousness and the legality of this country. But I think society is changing so fast, and young people who have access to developments and knowledge of developments that are happening outside India through the internet, through social media, through just generally being more aware and politically more active, I think that will permeate into the consciousness of society. And I hope young people will speak to their parents, their uncles, their aunts, and will change it. And I think, as I said before, that given the relatively absence of any hostile reaction to the 377 judgment, I hope that society will change faster. Sometimes we think we rue the fact of what kind of country are we living in, and we beat ourselves on the chest. There's tremendous inequality, and that, of course, there is. But I think we also tend to ignore sometimes the softer part of our country, the issue of tolerance, which is which is there in people. Yes, I know events have brought out the worst in people, and people I thought who were otherwise tolerant people have said remarkably horrible things to me in the last 5-10 years, and that has shocked me and surprised me. But more than I'm shocked and surprised because I expect a certain level of tolerance which has always been there in our country, right? So the bedrock, I think, of a country is acceptance, inclusion, and tolerance, with a few minor aberrations of hatred. And I hope, as regards the LGBTQ community is concerned, it will be tolerance and acceptance which will triumph over hatred and bigotry. And that will happen fast.
Okay. Given that we were just talking about tolerance and inclusion, so a lot of laws are influenced by societal forces. India might be a progressive country, but currently we witness incidents of violence against intercaste and interreligious marriages, even moral policing sometimes in the name of culture and sometimes in the name of love jihad. I think the Tanishq ad recently is the biggest example on how societal forces can stand so strongly against any form of inclusion. Um, how do you think society like ours, which is entrenched in not just patriarchy and casteism, but also transphobia and homophobia, can go about accepting or influencing a path of inclusivity and equality for the community?
Well, you see, I think that requires constant effort on the part of members of civil society. Yes, you're right. There is homophobia, there's transphobia. We are a conservative society. But as I mentioned earlier, we're a conservative society with a very strongly tolerant streak. But of course, when people are out to fan the passions of hatred against a particular community, and the point when a majority community starts feeling threatened by a minority, which is very peculiar, but it does happen for A or B reason, uh, then there is a definite problem, right? So the question is, how do we change that? And that was your question. How do we make sure that there is inclusion, that there is none of this hatred towards the other, as I would like to call it? Well, a simple part of it is spreading awareness that and empathy. I think that is the most important thing. When you see someone as the other, it's easy to hate them. When you portray someone as being like yourself, it's a little less easy to hate them. So I think it's important to end this segregation that has happened in our country. I think we have ghettos of different religions, different castes. Now that is probably again a stratification that has happened historically by virtue of class and religion, of course. But I think we need to make an attempt to make a dent into that segregation of societies into these groups and castes. That doesn't mean I want a homogeneous society. No, that would be to, I think, take away from the beauty or the plurality that which is India. What I mean is something quite different, which is a dialogue between different communities, right? And I think we therefore need greater visibility of these different communities, of the minorities. So it's happening with the queer community, of course, because of the 377 judgment. What I find lacking, for instance, in terms of religion is that the very few, say in a country like India, which is the biggest minority is Islam. There are very few people who are visible in the political sphere, in the civil society, who are Muslims, who command a respect of the community at large. There are, of course, great people, but I think they're simply not given the coverage that they need to be given. So I think we need to make an effort to empower, embolden, and make heroes and make icons and make people of the minority community to come out and be seen, and then to ask the country for empathy and say, look, here I am. I'm human. I have no horns on my head. I am a man, woman, trans person, just like yourselves. And then slowly build that up. Look, this is a problem that faces not just India. It faces many countries across the world. And there is no magic wand to this. There's no snap of the fingers and the answer. It's a constant battle, a battle we shall have to constantly fight, educate and empower. I think those are the two important things: to educate people about the bigotry around them, how that is wrong, and empowering people through education, through economic upliftment, and bring up the community. I think that's important.
Okay.
Of course, sorry. The most important thing I forgot to say is the
Okay.
medium of the courts. We need to engage the courts and ask the courts to come to the defense of, say, an intercaste marriage or an interreligion marriage. They have in the past done that in Hadia's case and in various matters relating to intercaste marriage as well. The Kap Panchayat case, and this is something I write about in my book. Uh, so I think we need to rely on the courts, but not everyone can afford to go to court. Kunal, it's an expensive proposition. A poor person in a small village far away from the high court will not find it easy. But those who can afford to go should go.
And it's also a very long fight. Like the court
Of course,
process is so long, it's so tedious. So one ought to have that willpower to stay committed.
that's correct.
And yeah.
Correct.
Okay. Because we were talking about representation, so the social structure of a country can become equal only when there's representation of people from all sections of society. And in this sense, somewhere I personally feel that the LGBTQ community lags far behind compared to the other religious or caste-based minorities that we have in India. What laws or policy do you think should be looked into to increase the representation and safeguard the rights and dignity of the community? How can we, because nothing is going to change unless people don't see more and more representation and they don't have a say in the matters, let's say in the political class, uh, in the judiciary, in other places of position, unless and until there's no representation, things are not going to change sustainably. How do you think that can be looked into?
Well, I think that's partially correct, I would say, in terms of the fact that representation is needed. That is beyond doubt. A fact that we do need a greater representation of the queer community in all sectors of or spheres of power, be it political, be it judicial, be it society at large. Uh, but reservations may not be the answer in the political sphere. Uh, the country has been trying to get one-third reservation for women in parliament, and that's been a non-starter for the longest time. So I think that is probably a more important thing to focus on, because you've said earlier in your opening comment that the queer community is more disadvantaged than most communities. I don't think that's necessarily true. There are intersectionalities, and let's not get into the question of competitive victimhood, right? So I think the cause of women, however, nevertheless, for reservations is much greater in terms of the demand of the queer community. We are still a much smaller minority, so representation will, even of a small amount, will make us roughly equal in the political sphere. But 50% of the country is women, and you have barely any representation of women in politics. And I was seeing some statistics yesterday that of about some 1,200 judges of the higher judiciary, only about 80 are women, right?
Yes.
So given that level of disparity, I think the need for reservations, if at all, is there for women. However, having said that, there is a case, I think, for reservations in public employment for certain parts of the queer community, for certain sections of the LGBTQIA community. So not necessarily lesbians and gays necessarily, because a lot of us come from privileged backgrounds and we don't need reservations. So if you see the Nalsar judgment, there was a suggestion there, in fact, a direction, that there should be reservation in government employment for the trans community. I would say that therefore may be necessary, but even within the trans community, I would say there should be a further subset which should get reservations. The trans community, as you know, is an umbrella term. So it has trans women, men, transgender, the idea of men who want, all, well, it's a large umbrella of sexuality. So let's not get into the technical details. But within that, I would say maybe the Hijras and the Kinnars is a community that has been traditionally uh, treated very, very poorly, right? So the idea of reservations is somewhat akin to historical system of reparations. So any community that has faced rampant discrimination historically, we offer reservations as form of reparations to level the playing field. So it's not sufficient that someone is disadvantaged today for A or B, C reason to ask for reservations and thereby breach the equality clause of our constitution. We need something more, which is to show that there's been such a fundamental inequality from the beginning to that community that you need reservations to rectify and remedy that, right? Because reservations has two sides. While it's very easy to say that if we give reservations to somebody, it inevitably has an impact on a person who's not getting reservations. So this is something that has to be dealt with delicately and cautiously. So therefore, I'm saying limit the reservations that are available to the queer community to the most disadvantaged and the underprivileged of the community, and that would be hijras and kinnars, who really have no source of income, who are ostracized by society and need all the help they can get.
Okay.
Now maybe we
So
wrap
when
this up
okay,
in
sure.
in 6 minutes. Yeah, at 7:30 I have an appointment. That's why.
Okay. So yeah, like I'll just so when we talk about bringing change, it must start at the most basic and the most grassroots level. As our primary socialization starts from school, it becomes crucial to include lessons on gender inclusivity and alternate sexualities at this level and make children aware about gender sensitivity and sexual diversity. However, these things are not included in the education policy as of now. What do you think can be done to make our school curriculum more inclusive?
Uh, you're talking of gender sensitization and inclusion, and there's barely any discussion of sex education in our curriculum. I think this is a taboo subject, and I don't see, given the current dispensation, that there is any likelihood of inclusion of these ideas of sexual preferences and the gender fluidity in our curriculum. It's not just going to happen. It may be needed. I think it is needed, but it's not going to happen. So how do we go about remedying that? I think that is something, an initiative schools will have to take on their own. And it's an initiative that parents will have to take with their children. This will be something that will have to be done at home. It's highly unlikely that it will be done at an institution, at some institutional level. So institutional level, I mean by the NCRT or the school boards. Uh, it should, however, be done by institutions at the school levels. Independent individual schools can do it. And there are schools who are currently doing this. At least in Delhi, I know of a few schools which are doing gender sensitization and talking about sexual preferences. And that's necessary because that also curbs bullying. Because one of the biggest problems the LGBT community faces is when a young queer person is bullied in school. So that's important. But this has to begin at home, really. We need to educate parents to do this.
Okay. So I'm just gonna quickly ask like three very quick questions, and yet they are very important, and I need to address them to you. Number one is, how do you think homophobia exists in our courtrooms, and does it function as a potential hindrance in the path of a person's personal or professional life?
Well, homophobia does exist in every aspect of our life, and it is no surprise, therefore, that it exists even in the courtroom. Of course, some part of it is internal fear of someone coming out, but I think there is a distinct homophobia, maybe not in the higher judiciary as much, even though I think there is still some. But certainly, I think the biggest problem a young lawyer has when they are queer is to expect clients to take them seriously. I think more than the
Hmm.
judges, I think the greater fear is how will your clients react to you. So yes, there is homophobia, and I think the only answer to that is come out in numbers and make it. That's why I came out many years ago, and try to smash that homophobia, and that it'll happen that way. I think just normalize it. I mean, there's nothing to Twitter and gossip about. If you're out, someone will laugh and say he's gay, and then that's the end of that.
Okay.
Hmm.
So I was reading a couple of articles and listening to a lot of podcasts which were dealing with um, same sex marriage in US and the marriage equality, and they were talking about, along with taking the legal route, they also took a societal route in which they were, making people aware about it's nothing. There's nothing. There's nothing unnatural in it. It's just demanding equal rights of marrying, as a straight couple would, as a heterosexual couple would. Even people within the LGBTQ umbrella want the same equality. So it's nothing but equal rights to marriage. How do you think like a similar model can be taken up in India, wherein rather than like along with taking the legal route, there's more sensitization of people and normalization within our social sphere?
I think that's absolutely imperative. I don't think there are any two questions about the fact that a legal battle alone is not sufficient. And it's not only a question of legal battle being sufficient. I don't think the legal battle can be won without having some change in society. Because judges who are going to decide this issue eventually are not people who've been snatched from Mars. They're members of our society who live in India and are drawn from our milieu, you know, our way of thinking. So they will obviously reflect and respond to, consequently, what society is thinking. And that's why I think the 2018 judgment was easy to come by, because by then society had also changed. So yes, we need to make a change in society. We need to uh, enter into discussion that to have gay marriage doesn't mean destruction of religion. One can keep religion, because that's the greatest fear that is often expressed, is that it is opening the floodgates to all kinds of things, and therefore it's an assault on religion. Then you have to maybe comment and say that this is the horse religion. This is above or beyond religion. This can be under the Special Marriage Act. People are not asking necessarily to go to the temple and insist that the priest marry them, if the priest doesn't want to marry them. The ability, however, to go to a court of law, which is a secular institution, and seek recognition of their partnership and marriage under the Special Marriage Act, that is what is being sought, I think. And therefore, if that is discussed about and debated, and I think people's hearts and minds will change, and that will make the fight for marriage equality better and easier.
Okay, just one last question. I know I'm taking a lot of time, but just this is the last
No worry.
question. So, why do you think there's a lack of political will in bringing a legislation would do a lot of these things? Because I remember when the 2018 judgment comes, all parties, that includes from the conservative to like the so-called, like, even though like in India there's like a very little ideological alien um, affiliation of parties, like more or most of them just like keep switching from one camp to another as per their convenience. But a lot of them did openly accepted the judgment. Yet I feel that there is a lack of political will to bring any legislation on this, to give people equal rights, be it in terms of discrimination or, like even in terms of marriage, like the course that you are taking, approaching the court to do it. Even Parliament holds the power to do the same thing. Why do you think the political class is not taking this up?
Well, I don't expect the political class to take it up, right? Let's be clear about that. Uh, because it's simply not politically popular to do so. That's why the political class is not taking it up. You mentioned the fact that we have to have societal sensitization that shows that society is not yet sensitized, right? That's why we need sensitization. And to say that society is not sensitized means the politicians are not interested in it because they want votes and they don't want to do anything which is unpopular. Or so therefore, that's why they're not going to do it. I don't expect, and this is not, again, I repeat, an Indian phenomenon. It's a worldwide phenomenon, that this is a case where the courts lead and society follows, right? Because this is so out of the mainstream that for society to accept it per se is simply not going to happen. So you need these changes, and these changes will come top down effectively, really, from court into society rather than the other way around. I am saying there is a symbiotic relationship between how society functions and court functions, and there will be an interplay and a dialogue between the two. Nevertheless, the final order will have to come from the uh, Supreme Court or the courts at large. And it's not going to come from politicians. And you mentioned 2018 and uniform acceptance, and all political parties accepted it. Yet in 2013, when the judgment came of Kaushal, and at that time, the Supreme Court, I think, ducked its responsibility, constitutional responsibility, and left it to Parliament. And the UPA was in power at that point of time. Even then, political parties didn't think it necessary or want to enact legislation to repeal Section 377, something which you say has a near universal consensus. Forget that. In 2018 itself, the government could have amended the law, could have supported the Supreme Court striking down Section 377, and chose not to do so, and simply said, we leave it to the wisdom of the Supreme Court to do what they think is right, as though the court is going to do anything other than that. But without any sense of irony, this is what they said in court. So even at that point, there was no political will to do something even for which there was consensus. So I don't expect change to happen. It's not politically popular. So change will happen through courts, and I have faith in the courts. It'll take time. As I remember, there's a very old dialogue, "Tarikh pe tarikh," and it happens in the court. And they say the wheels of justice grind slow. But as Martin Luther King also said, that the arc of history bends slowly but surely towards justice.
Thank you so very much to do this. Like, I'm so very grateful.